What if the most dangerous place on Earth was also the place where certain people slept the most peacefully? Not because the danger had disappeared, not because they had built walls high enough to keep it out, but because they had learned something about the darkness that their enemies never could. In the fall of 1871, Colonel Ranald Mackenzie led 600 men from the 4th United States Cavalry into Blanco Canyon, West Texas. He was not a timid man. He had survived the Civil War with wounds that would have ended most careers. He had a reputation for aggressive pursuit, for pushing into territory where other commanders hesitated. He was, by any reasonable measure, one of the most dangerous soldiers on the frontier. And that night, he made a decision that would haunt him for years. He let his men build campfires. What Mackenzie did not know, what he could not have known, was that Quanah Parker's warriors had been watching his column for days. 4 Comanche scouts had shadowed 600 soldiers through terrain the cavalry could barely navigate. They watched every stumble, every wrong turn, every gap in the night patrol. And when Mackenzie's men lit their fires, those flames were not warmth. They were a map. A precise, glowing arrow pointing directly at the heart of the camp. Around midnight, the Comanche came. Not in a straight charge. They came at full speed, dragging dried buffalo hides behind their horses, ringing bells, firing shots into the air. A wall of noise and chaos designed not to kill, but to unmake order. 600 horses and mules tore loose. Lariat ropes snapped like pistol shots. Iron picket pins spun through the dark like blades. When it ended, Quanah Parker's warriors had taken 70 of Mackenzie's finest animals, including the colonel's own gray pacer. On the southern plains, stealing a man's horse was frequently the same as a death sentence. The Comanche had understood that for 2 centuries. But here is the question nobody asks afterward. While Mackenzie's camp was dissolving into chaos, while 600 trained soldiers scrambled in the dark, where was Quanah Parker? Where were his people? What were they doing the moment before those warriors rode out? And what would they return to? They were sleeping, in that same darkness, in that same wilderness full of enemies, predators, and temperatures that could kill a man who made a single wrong decision. And they would wake up alive. That is what this video is about. The Comanche Nation emerged in the 17th century and by the early 1700s controlled a territory historians estimate at roughly 240,000 square miles, comparable in size to modern Afghanistan. They called it Comancheria. Entering it without permission was not a mistake. It was a final one. For nearly 2 centuries, they held that territory against the Spanish, the Mexicans, the Texans, the Apache, and eventually the full weight of the United States Army. Not with fortresses, not with walls, with knowledge, and with 7 practices so precise, so deeply tested across generations, that their enemies spent decades trying to understand how the Comanche seemed to simply vanish into the landscape every single night. Here are those 7 things. Number 1. They chose terrain that would fight for them. A Comanche camp was never placed the way a tired man drops his pack at the end of a long day. Every campsite was chosen the way a general chooses a battlefield, except the Comanche were choosing where to sleep. In winter, the bands moved deep into the canyons of the Texas Panhandle. Palo Duro Canyon, the second largest canyon on the North American continent, stretching 120 miles long and reaching depths of 800 feet, was not just a hiding place. It was a fortress that required no construction. Canyon walls blocked the killing winds of the Llano Estacado, where winter temperatures dropped fast enough to end a life before sunrise. Inside, they had water, grass for the horses, and approach routes so narrow that a handful of warriors could hold back a force 10 times their size. In warmer months on the open plains, the calculation shifted. Without natural walls, they moved to elevated ground with unobstructed sightlines in every direction. They camped near water, but never directly on riverbanks, where tree cover could conceal an approaching enemy until it was too late. They needed to see before being seen. This was the foundation. But the Comanche understood something their enemies rarely did. The best position in the world is worthless if you cannot leave it the moment you need to. Remember that. It will matter before this video ends. Number 2. They brought their war horses inside the tipi. This is the practice that stopped other plains tribes mid-sentence when they told stories about it around their own fires, sometimes with disbelief, sometimes with something closer to reverence. A Comanche warrior's warhorse was not transportation. It was not property in any European sense of the word. It was the single object that stood between him and death in every meaningful situation the plains could produce. No horse meant no hunting. No horse meant no escape. No horse meant dying of thirst on flat ground with the horizon mocking you in every direction. The Spanish had learned this at enormous cost in the early 1700s. Comanche raiders did not always need to kill their enemies. They simply took the horses and left. The land did the rest. So the warhorse slept where the warrior slept. Not outside with the herd. Inside. If space required it, his wife slept outside. The rawhide tether ran from the horse's neck to the warrior's own wrist, not loosely, deliberately. Because if enemies came through the camp at midnight, if chaos erupted exactly the way it erupted for Mackenzie's men, that warrior did not stumble through darkness looking for a panicked animal. He was already holding it, mounted and responding in seconds, not minutes. The rope around his wrist wasn't a leash. It was the distance between waking up and never waking up at all. Number 3. They posted scouts who moved like the landscape itself. Before the camp settled for the night, warriors were already outside in the surrounding terrain. Watching, silent, invisible in a way that the Tonkawa scouts, themselves experienced trackers, could not match and, by 1871, had largely stopped trying to. Blanco Canyon proved exactly how this worked. Mackenzie's column of 600 men entered that canyon believing they had surprise on their side. They had nothing of the sort. Comanche scouts had picked up the trail almost immediately and shadowed the entire force without detection. When the Tonkawa scouts finally sensed they were being observed and gave chase, the Comanche warriors simply accelerated and disappeared into the hills. In 2 centuries of conflict between those two peoples, that gap in horsemanship had never meaningfully closed. The result was total informational dominance. The Comanche knew Mackenzie's exact position, his numbers, his route, his errors. Mackenzie's men had no reliable idea where the Comanche camp even was. Scouts communicated back through the night using signals. Mirror flashes at dawn relayed position updates across distances that voices could never reach. The camp maintained awareness of everything moving within its perimeter while revealing nothing about itself. Here is what that means in practice. By the time Mackenzie's men were stumbling toward the Comanche position, the Comanche already knew they were coming. They knew from which direction. They knew how fast. They had time to prepare, to move, or, as they chose that night, to attack first and disappear before the response could be organized. The camp was never blind. Hold that thought, because by the end of this video, you will understand exactly what it cost them when that finally changed. Number 4. They controlled fire the way a soldier controls a weapon. Fire on the open plains at night is visible from over a mile away. On the Llano Estacado, a plateau so flat that on clear days you can trace the gentle curve of the earth itself along the horizon, a campfire is not warmth. It is a declaration. It is a precise announcement of your location, your size, and your confidence that nobody dangerous is watching. Mackenzie's decision to allow fires in Blanco Canyon was, from a Comanche perspective, not a mistake born of carelessness. It was a mistake born of not understanding what kind of war he was fighting. Those flames told Quanah Parker's scouts everything they needed to plan the midnight raid down to its last detail. The distance, the layout, the gaps between sentries, all of it, illuminated by the enemy's own hand. For their own camps, the Comanche approached fire with a discipline that had been refined across generations of consequence. In hostile territory or on the move, they often went without fires entirely. They ate dried meat, pemmican, and provisions that required no heat. When fire was genuinely necessary, they fed it dry hardwood, specifically chosen to produce minimal smoke, and they positioned it where canyon walls or natural tree cover would absorb the light before it reached the open sky. Smoke carried its own danger. During daylight, a column rising from the prairie was readable for miles by anyone who knew the language of the land. At night, the smell of burning wood traveled on the wind long before any eye could find the source. A scout with experience did not need to see a fire to locate one. The Comanche understood something that sounds simple, but is extraordinarily difficult to practice. Comfort is a signal. Every luxury that makes the night easier also makes you easier to find. They chose invisibility. Every time. Number 5. They staged their weapons for combat that could begin before they were fully awake. A Comanche warrior did not finish the evening and set his weapons aside the way a man hangs up his coat. Every piece of his arsenal was positioned according to a logic that assumed the worst could begin at any second, because on the southern plains, it could. His bow lay within arm's reach. Roughly 3 feet long, constructed from laminated wood, horn, and sinew. A composite design that took months to produce, and generated draw weights that modern archers still find remarkable. His quiver sat beside it, fletched with wild turkey or turkey vulture feathers chosen deliberately because they remained stable even when wet with blood. His lance leaned against the tipi wall nearest his sleeping position, 7 to 8 feet of hardened wood, close enough to reach without standing. But here is the detail that separated Comanche readiness from simply keeping weapons nearby. The quiver was organized by touch. War arrows, tipped with metal or napped flint, were separated from hunting arrows by position and by feel. In complete darkness, with chaos erupting around him, a warrior's hand went into that quiver and found exactly what the situation required, not by sight. By memory built through thousands of repetitions across a lifetime of preparation that began in early childhood. A skilled Comanche warrior could release 20 arrows in the time it took a soldier with a contemporary rifle to load and fire once. That gap was not natural talent. It was the product of a culture that did not separate the preparation for war from the rhythms of daily life, including the last quiet moment before sleep. When the midnight raid came, the response was not a scramble. It was a continuation. Number 6. They prepared the mind before they prepared the body. Everything described so far has a modern equivalent. Special forces units study terrain before insertion. Elite cavalry units historically kept mounts close. Forward scouts are standard military doctrine. Fire discipline is taught in the first weeks of ranger school. Weapon staging is muscle memory for anyone who has trained seriously for close quarters combat. This practice is different. It does not have a clean modern translation, and that is precisely why it may be the most important one. The Comanche believed in puha, a spiritual power present throughout the natural world, earned by individuals through vision quests, fasting, and ceremony that could span days without food or shelter. A warrior's capacity in battle was not understood as purely physical. It was the accumulated weight of every vision he had received, every spirit that had chosen to align with him, every ceremony he had completed with honesty and endurance. Before settling into camp, warriors took time that had no tactical label. They prayed, they consulted the guidance of personal spirit animals, they handled their medicine shields, constructed from 2 layers of buffalo hide, packed between with feathers or fur, painted with designs that emerged from individual vision quests and belonged to no other warrior on earth. These shields were treated with a reverence that went beyond military equipment. They were stored separately from the camp, sometimes at significant distance, and brought out only when the spiritual weight of what was coming required it. Eagle feathers carried specific significance connected to warfare, and were worn tied in the hair, attached to shields, woven into war bonnets. The number and placement were not decorative. They were intentional, in ways that the warriors themselves understood, and outsiders rarely did. Here is what modern psychology might recognize in this practice. Even if the language is entirely different, the warriors who slept most soundly in the most dangerous landscape on the continent were not the ones who had suppressed their fear. They were the ones who had processed it, transformed it. Through ceremony, through ritual, through a structured relationship with something larger than the immediate threat, they achieved what performance psychologists now call pre-competition clarity, the state where the mind is neither suppressing anxiety nor consumed by it, but settled beneath it. The Comanche did not separate the spiritual from the tactical. They understood, across generations of lived experience, that a warrior who could not quiet his mind before sleep was a warrior who would hesitate at the wrong moment. And on the southern plains, hesitation had only one outcome. Number 7. They oriented every teepee to read the wind and the land. The final preparation was the quietest, and in some ways the most precise. A Comanche teepee was never placed wherever the ground happened to be flat. It was oriented. The entrance faced east, toward the rising sun. This was partly ceremonial, connected to the spiritual significance of dawn in Comanche life. But it was also, without any contradiction, Sound engineering. The prevailing winds across the southern plains blow predominantly from the west. By facing the entrance east, the teepee's back wall met the wind directly, presenting the most structurally stable profile to the force most likely to test it. The entire structure was tilted slightly eastward as well, a subtle adjustment that streamlined the rear and reduced the wind load during the violent storms that crossed the Texas prairie with almost no warning and almost no mercy. The smoke hole at the top used adjustable flaps, called ears, controlled by exterior poles that could be repositioned without exposing anyone inside. In summer heat, the lower edges of the buffalo hide covering rolled up to pull cooler air beneath the structure. In winter, an interior skin lining created an insulating air gap that held heat from the central fire with a quiet efficiency that required no additional fuel. And beneath all of this engineering sat one capability that made every other preparation meaningful. 2 women could fully disassemble a teepee and have it packed and ready to move in under 2 hours. The lodge poles that formed the structure doubled as travois frames, the sled-like carriers that horses pulled across the plains, which meant that if scouts sent word of an approaching threat in the middle of the night, the camp did not defend a fixed position. It dissolved. It moved. It became, once again, invisible. The Comanche did not build permanent defenses because permanence itself was a vulnerability. Their greatest defensive asset was never a wall or a canyon or a weapon. It was motion. The ability to read the land, adapt to it instantly, and move through it faster than anything pursuing them. That was the 7th practice, and it was the one that held all the others together. Colonel Ranald Mackenzie never forgot Blanco Canyon. He spent 3 more years studying the landscape, adjusting his tactics, learning, slowly and at significant cost, what the Comanche had known since childhood. And in September 1874, his cavalry finally located a large Comanche encampment in Palo Duro Canyon at dawn. The soldiers descended before the camp could fully respond. But Mackenzie did not win that morning the way armies usually win. He did not defeat the Comanche in battle. His forces destroyed the horse herd, over 1,000 animals. Some accounts place the number higher, though exact figures from that engagement remain debated by historians. What is not debated is the outcome. Without horses, the 7 practices that had sustained the Comanche for 2 centuries became impossible to execute. You cannot choose terrain if you cannot move to it. You cannot bring your warhorse inside if the warhorse is gone. You cannot outrun an enemy, dissolve a camp, or feed your people through a plains winter on foot. The system did not fail. The foundation was taken. And here is what that tells us about everything described in this video. Every one of those 7 practices, the terrain selection, the horse inside the teepee, the ghost scouts, the fire discipline, the staged weapons, the spiritual preparation, the engineered shelter, none of them were individual tricks. They were a single integrated system. Pull one piece out and the others weaken. Destroy the foundation and the entire structure, however brilliantly designed, cannot stand. The camp was never blind. Until the horses were gone, the Comanche were never outfought. Not once in 2 centuries of continuous conflict against enemies with numerical advantages, industrial weapons, and institutional resources the Comanche could not match. They were outweighted, worn down not by superior tactics, but by the slow arithmetic of a nation that could absorb losses indefinitely and a people who eventually could not. Today, the Comanche Nation is headquartered in Lawton, Oklahoma, with more than 17,000 enrolled members. The practices described in this video were not ancient mysteries preserved in academic footnotes. They were a living system, tested every single night against consequences that were immediate and final, refined across generations by people who could not afford to get it wrong. Some of those practices are now studied by military historians, some by survival specialists. Some, perhaps, deserve to be studied by anyone who has ever struggled to feel safe enough to close their eyes. The most dangerous landscape on Earth, and they slept peacefully in it, because they understood something most of us never will, that safety is not a place you find. It is a system you build, every single night before you close your eyes.